federal military government. B. Establishment of a military headquarters comprising equal representation from the regions and headed by a chief of staff. C. Creation of area commands corresponding to existing regions and under the charge of area commanders. D. Matters of policy, including appointments and promotion to top executive posts in the armed forces and the police, to be dealt with by the Supreme Military Council. E. During the period of the military government, military governors will have control over area commands for internal security. F. Creation of a Lagos garrison, including Ikeja barracks. 2. On appointment to certain posts. The following appointments must be approved by Supreme Military Council. A. Diplomatic and consular posts. B. Senior posts in the armed forces and the police. C. Super-scale federal civil service and federal corporation posts. 3. On the functioning of the Supreme Military Council. Any decision affecting the whole country must be determined by the Supreme Military Council. Where a meeting is not possible, such a matter must be referred to military governors for comment and concurrence. 4. That all the law officers of the Federation should meet in Benin on January 14th and list out all the decrees and provisions of decrees concerned, so that they may be repealed not later than January 21st if possible. V. That for at least the next 6 months, there should be purely a military government, having nothing to do whatever with politicians. Soldiers involved in disturbances on January 15, 1966, and thereafter 13. Members expressed views about the future of those who have been detained in connection with all the disturbances since January 15, 1966, and agreed that the fate of soldiers in detention should be determined not later than end of January 1967. Ad hoc Constitutional Conference 14. The Council next considered the question of the resumption of the Ad hoc Constitutional Committee and the acceptance of that committee's recommendations of September 1966. After some exchange of views, it was agreed that the Ad hoc Committee should resume sitting as soon as practicable to begin from where they left off, and that the question of accepting the unanimous recommendations of September 1966 be considered at a later meeting of the Supreme Military Council. The problems of displaced persons, 15. The Council considered exhaustively the problems of displaced persons, with particular reference to their rehabilitation, employment, and property. The view was expressed and generally accepted that the federal government ought to take the lead in establishing a national body which will be responsible for raising and making appeal for funds. Lieutenant Colonel Ojukwu made the point, which was accepted by Lieutenant Colonel Katsina, that in the present situation, the intermingling of Easterners and Northerners was not feasible. After each military governor had discussed these problems as they affected his area, the Council agreed. A. On rehabilitation, that finance permanent secretaries should resume their meeting within 2 weeks and submit recommendations, and that each region should send 3 representatives to the meeting. B. On employment and recovery of property, that civil servants and corporation staff, including daily paid employees, who have not been absorbed should continue to be paid their full salaries until March 31st, 1967, provided they have not got alternative employment, and that the military governors of the East, West, and Midwest should send representatives, police commissioners, to meet and discuss the problem of recovery of property left behind by displaced persons. Lieutenant Colonel Ejor disclosed that the employment situation in his region was so acute that he had no alternative but to ask non-Midwesterners working the private sector in his region to quit and make room for Midwesterners repatriated from elsewhere. Lieutenant Colonel Ojukwu stated that he fully appreciated the problem faced by both the military governor, West, and the military governor, Midwest, in this matter, and that if in the last resort, either of them had to send the Easterners concerned back to the East, he would understand, much as the action would further complicate the resettlement problem in the East. He assured the Council that his order that non-Easterners should leave the Eastern region would be kept under constant review, with a view to its being lifted as soon as practicable. 16. On the question of future meeting of the Supreme Military Council, members agreed that future meetings will be held in Nigeria at a venue to be mutually agreed. 17. On the question of government information media, the Council agreed that all government information media should be restrained from making inflammatory statements and causing embarrassment to various governments in the Federation. 18. There were other matters not on the agenda, which were also considered, among which were the form of government for Nigeria, reported in paragraph 12 above, and the disruption of the country's economy by the lack of movement of rail and road transport, which the regional governors agreed to look into. 19. The meeting began and ended in a most cordial atmosphere, and members unanimously issued a second and final communiqué. 20. In his closing remarks, the chairman of the Ghana National Liberation Council expressed his pleasure at the successful outcome of the meeting and commended the decisions taken to the Nigerian leaders for their implementation. Lieutenant Colonel Gowon, on behalf of his colleagues, thanked the Ghanaian leader for the excellent part he had played in helping to resolve the issues. The successful outcome of the meeting was then toasted with champagne, and the Nigerians took leave of the Ghanaians. 21. The proceedings of the meeting were reported verbatim for each regional government and the federal government by their respective official reporters, and tape-recorded versions were distributed to each government. Final Aburi Communique. The Supreme Military Council of Nigeria resumed its meeting in Ghana on the 5th of January and continued and concluded discussion of the remaining subjects on the agenda. The Council reached agreement on all the items. On the powers and functions of the federal military government, the Council reaffirmed its belief in the workability of the existing institutions, subject to necessary safeguards. Other matters on which agreements were reached included the following: reorganization, administration and control of the army, appointments and promotions to the senior ranks in the armed forces, the police, diplomatic and consular services, as well as appointments to superscale posts in the Federal Civil Service and the equivalent posts in the Federal Statutory Corporations. On the question of displaced persons, the Supreme Military Council agreed to set up a committee to look into the problems of rehabilitation and recovery of property. In this connection, the military governor of the East assured the Council that the order that non-Easterners should leave the Eastern region would be reviewed with a view to its being lifted as soon as practicable. Agreement was also reached that the staff and employees of governments and statutory corporations who have had to leave their posts as a result of recent disturbances in the country should continue to be paid their full salaries up to the end of March 31st, 1967, provided they have not found alternative employment. The Council agreed that the ad hoc committee on the constitutional future of the country should be resumed as soon as practicable, and that the unanimous recommendations of the committee in September 1966 will be considered by the Supreme Military Council at a later meeting. The Council unanimously agreed that future meetings of the Council should be held in Nigeria at a venue to be announced later. The entire members of the Supreme Military Council expressed profound regret for the bloodshed which has engulfed the country in the past year, and a vow to do all in their power to ensure there is no recurrence of the unhappy situation. The members of the Supreme Military Council place on record their profound appreciation and gratitude for the constructive initiative and assistance rendered by the chairman of the National Liberation Council, the government, and people of Ghana. Statement by the Supreme Council on the reorganization of the army and the approval of senior appointments and its declaration on the use of Force 1. The Supreme Military Council, now meeting in Ghana, has agreed on the following reorganization of the army. The army is to be governed by the Supreme Military Council, the chairman of, which will be known as Commander-in-Chief and head of the federal military government. There will be a military headquarters on which the regions will be equally represented and which will be headed by a chief of staff. In each region there shall be an area command under the charge of an area commander and corresponding with the existing regions. All matters of policy, including appointments and promotions of persons in executive posts in the armed forces and police, shall be dealt with by the Supreme Military Council. During the period of the military government, military governors will have control over their area commands in matters of internal security. The following appointments must be approved by the Supreme Military Council: diplomatic and consular posts, senior posts in the armed forces and the police, superscale federal civil service and federal corporation posts. Any decision affecting the whole country must be determined by the Supreme Military Council. Where a meeting is not possible, such a matter must be referred to military governors for comment and concurrence. 2. We, the members of the Supreme Military Council of Nigeria meeting at Accra on 4th day of January 1967, hereby solemnly and unequivocally declare that we renounce the use of force as a means of settling the present crisis in Nigeria and hold ourselves in honor bound by this declaration. Reaffirm our faith in discussions and negotiation as the only peaceful way of resolving the Nigerian crisis. Agree to exchange information on the quantity of arms and ammunition in each unit of the army in each region, and also on the quantity of new arms and ammunition in stock. Signatures of the 9 leaders.